Oh man, in times like these, I'm glad to have a Savior. And my heart definitely goes out to the Trouts right now. I remember 3 years ago, me and Brother Gene, and Brother Justin, you probably remember Brother Gene, and Miss Jen, I'm sure you do. He helped us do quite a bit in here. He was very instrumental in helping us with the building when we got into it. And I was doing something. I don't really know what I was doing. I don't think anybody knows what I was doing, but I was trying to do something to help, I think. And I get a call from a total stranger about them getting in a car accident. I'm pretty sure it's probably in the same general area. Smoky Hill is awful. That is terrible. I mean, seriously, I just know I see accidents there all the time. Be careful on Smoky Hill. But definitely rouse your cage. Psalm chapter number 10. Psalm chapter 10, and we are getting down to the end of the chapter. There are 18 verses. We are in verse number 14. Really 14 and 15, a little bit of recap, and we'll get through the end of this thing hopefully tonight. But it was interesting today. Was talking to a young lady from work, and she's from Germany. And somehow somebody brought something up about dictators. And, here's this young lady from Germany. It gets really awkward because no one wants to bring up the H name, the Hitler, And so somehow dictators came up, and I said, well, I think the worst dictator that this planet's ever seen is yet to come. And everybody's like, what are you talking about, They're all like, yeah, Trump. That's what all the young 20-somethings are thinking. I'm like, no, it's not what you think. I said it's in the book of Revelation. And everybody got real quiet. And I looked at her, I said, hey, if it's good enough for Martin Luther, it's good enough for you. Because she's German, But anyway, not Martin Luther King. Martin Luther, difference, all right? Psalm chapter 10, and we're talking about the most brutal dictator there ever shall be and how God's going to deal with him. And really what you learn is the only way to fight a bully is to beat the stuffing out of him, all right? And I'll tell you right now, this mentality that's in our... I heard about this... I'll get to this Bible here in a second, sorry. I heard about the stabbing thing at OSU, at Ohio State. And, they're giving advice like, okay, number 1, hide. Number 2, run. Number 3, fight if you have to. And then one person said, one of the faculty said, do whatever you can to defend yourself. And I thought, with what? They can't carry. You tell them they can't have weapons, you want them to defend themselves, And so it's an amazing thing. And what I'm getting at is there's this idea in our culture, and listen, I'm not for violence, and you teach your kids, hey, avoid fights if you have to, but at the same time, sometimes a bully needs to be hit in the mouth. That's the only way to get them to back down. I know this is probably not the best thing to say in front of kids and all that, but the anti-bullying stuff, I'm trying not to go on a rant here, but this anti-bullying stuff, it's made me think a lot about how we get kids to look at this stuff and how we get adults to look at this stuff. Well, if we're just nice enough, and if we maybe we understand where they're coming from. Sometimes they need to be put in their place. And the worst dictators that ever lived, there's a couple common threads with them. Number 1, they didn't want to follow anybody. That's one problem. Number 2, and they make terrible leaders so they don't know how to follow. And number 2, they're usually people that don't back down until they're confronted. And I heard my pastor said years ago, Pastor Paul used to say, sometimes a bold spirit needs to be met with a bold spirit. Some of you may or may not understand this. There have been times where people come and visit our church, and I'm very friendly. But there have been a couple of occasions I can think of where right away someone came to me and said something that was visiting for a first or second time, and I was gracious about it, but I was very direct in my response. You say, why? Because sometimes a bold spirit needs to be met with a bold spirit. And here you find a very bold spirit, one that says that God's not looking or watching anything that's going on. And in verse 15, you know what God's reaction to a bully is? I'm going to break his arm. I mean, come on, guys. That's what it says, right? All right, look at verse 15. Break thou the arm of the wicked and the evil man. Who's that wicked and evil man? He's the Antichrist. Now, again, to see it one more time, look at Zechariah chapter number 11. This is prophecy about what's going to happen to him. Zechariah chapter number 11. Then we'll go to Psalm chapter 37. We're going to visit Psalm 37 quite a few times tonight. Zechariah is the second to last book in your Old Testament. Zechariah chapter 11. It's an interesting, there's no book like this book, guys. There's no book like the Bible. Zechariah 11, look at verse number 17. Woe to the idol shepherd. Not I-D-L-E, but I-D-O-L. Woe to the idle shepherd that leaveth the flock. He's a false shepherd is what he is. The sword shall be upon his arm and upon his right eye. His arm shall be clean dried up, and his right eye shall be utterly darkened. All right, look at Psalm chapter number 37. Psalm chapter 37. You say, why is he called the idol shepherd? Because an image, an idol of him is reared, is put up to stand in the holy place, as is mentioned in the book of Daniel, all right, and as is mentioned in Matthew chapter 24. Look at Psalm chapter 37, Psalm 37. And what God's going to do is he's going to break this bully's arm because he basically had the whole world worshiping after him, and he comes in peaceably, but eventually it ends in violence. Psalm chapter 37, look at verse number 17. For the arms of the wicked shall be broken. Underline it. But the Lord upholdeth the righteous. There's a contrast there. Now in the book of Proverbs and in Psalms, both places, you'll find that God will say, this is this, but then this is this. And he'll give you contrasting statements. And so what he does here, if you read Psalm 37, there's a constant volleying back and forth between the just, the righteous, and the wicked and the evil man. And you could say in a general sense, here's the characteristics of the wicked man. But in a more specific, in a prophetic sense, what God's talking about is not just the wicked in general, but a man. A specific wicked man. That man is the Antichrist. All right? Look, if you would, at, let's see here, I think it's Jeremiah chapter 48. Jeremiah 48. Jeremiah 48. And if you learn, Judas Iscariot. The name Iscariot means a man of Kerioth. And Kerioth is part of Moab. All right? And so you'll find prophetic references to how God's going to deal with a man from Moab. And that man is the Antichrist, Judas Iscariot. Jeremiah 48, and look at verse number, let's see here, Jeremiah 48, I think I have the right verse. Oh yeah, verse number 15. Moab is spoiled and gone up out of her cities, and his chosen young men are gone down in the slaughter, saith the King, whose name is the Lord of hosts. The calamity of Moab is near to come, and his affliction hasteth fast. Now here's a question. If you notice something in Scripture, think about this. When we talk about America the Beautiful, don't we refer to her in the feminine? Typically, we refer to countries and nations in the feminine. And yet here, this nation is called him. All right, look again there in verse 16. His affliction hasteth fast. Well, whose affliction? It's a man that's from Moab, from Kerioth. Look back at, let's see here, verse number 11. Moab hath been at ease from his youth. He hath settled on his lees, and hath not been emptied from vessel to vessel. Neither hath he gone into captivity. Therefore his taste remained in him, and his scent is not changed. Therefore, behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that I will send unto him wanderers. There shall cause him to wander, and shall empty his vessels, and break their bottles. And Moab shall be ashamed of Chemosh, as the house of Israel was ashamed of Bethel, their confidence. Interestingly enough, the way God describes the end of Moab there is very similar to how he describes the end of Mystery Babylon in Revelation 17 and 18. All right? So again, what you're seeing here is that God refers to breaking the arms and destroying the man of Moab. You say, what is that all about? It's about the Antichrist. You can read about it again in Ezekiel chapter 30. Won't go there right now. But again, back to Psalm chapter 10. Back to Psalm chapter 10. He says, break thou the arm of the wicked and the evil man. Now, if you remember where we started, look back at verse 2. Psalm 10 and verse 2. The wicked in his pride. Verse 3, for the wicked boasteth of his heart's desire. Verse 4, the wicked through the pride of his countenance will not seek after God. God is not in all his thoughts. All right? And then it goes on to describe everything that this wicked man is going to do. All right? There from verse number 5 all the way down to verse number 11. And then in verse 12, the Lord is petitioned. David, speaking on the behalf of the nation of Israel, asks God to get up, to rise up, and come back and to rescue them. And in verse 15, is fulfilled with what the Lord does by breaking the arm of the wicked and the evil man. It says here, seek out his wickedness till thou find none. Now, what does that have to do with? Well, the fact is that there's a place. Go to Psalm 37. Go to Psalm 37. And again, I'm gonna draw a correlation between the Antichrist and Judas Iscariot because there is a lot of stuff that connects them throughout the Bible. They're the only two people ever called the son of perdition. We know that the Antichrist, when the spirit of the devil comes out of the bottomless pit and enters the man of sin, and he becomes the son of perdition, that Antichrist, that spirit of Antichrist, comes out of somewhere. Where does it come out of? According to Revelation, the bottomless pit. And what's interesting about that is that Judas also went to a pit. We'll see that here in just a second. Psalm 37, look at verse number 10. For yet a little while, and the wicked shall not be. Yea, thou shalt diligently consider his place. Underline that. Thou shalt consider his place, and it shall not be. Now, back in Psalm chapter 10, you just read, seek out his wickedness till thou find none. In other words, exterminate him. All right? And it says there again in Psalm 37 in verse 10, diligently consider his place, and it shall not be. All right, you say, what is he referring to? Look at Acts chapter number 1. Go to Acts chapter number 1. And this is where, again, the Bible becomes alive because it's all connected. And when you connect the dots, it's sort of like a crime scene, all right? You get the suspects, you line them up, you start connecting all these dots, you see there's a connection between the Antichrist, the wicked and the evil man of Psalm chapter 10, and Judas Iscariot. Look at Acts chapter number 1. Acts chapter number 1. And again, in Psalm 37, you read about his own place. His place. Consider his place till thou find none. All right, look at Acts chapter 1 in verse number 25, talking about the replacement of Judas. All right, that he may take part of this ministry and apostleship, from which Judas by transgression fell, that he might go to where? His own place. He went to his own place. All right, look at 2 Samuel chapter number 18. 2 Samuel chapter number 18. Now, there's another guy in the Old Testament that has his own place as well, and he's also a great picture of the Antichrist. Psalm chapter 18. Now, there's several types, there's several pictures of the Antichrist throughout the Bible in the Old Testament. Here's another one of them. 2 Samuel 18, and look, if you would, at verse number 18. Brother St. John, if you read verse 18 for us.
Now Absalom in his lifetime had taken and reared up for himself a pillar, which is in the king's hill. So he said, I have no son to keep my name in remembrance. And he called the pillar after his own name, and it is called to this day Absalom's place.
Notice that he's childless. He's childless, right? There's no son there to remember his name. Now, I'm not trying to draw too much of a connection here, but you know what's interesting about the Antichrist? The Bible says that he'll have, there'll be no desire of women in him. Now, some guys teach that he'll be a queer or homosexual because of that. I can't necessarily say that. It just says he won't have the desire of women. Now, does that mean because he's, so politically engaged, he doesn't care to have a relationship? Here's all I can tell you is, here's another connection with him and Absalom. There's no son to take on his name. So you know what he does? He rears up something. He puts something in that place so that people will remember him by. Absalom does that, and it's called Absalom's place. You know what Judas does? He goes to his own place, according to Acts chapter 1. And you read about that. For sake of time, you won't go there. But if you want to write this down, Psalm chapter 88, verse 18, talks about an acquaintance of the Lord's Christ, which would be Judas, all right, who goes into darkness. All right, Psalm chapter 88, verse 18. So go back to Psalm chapter 10. Psalm chapter 10. And again, we're talking about the Lord rising up, coming back, being a helper to the fatherless and to the poor in the tribulation from verse 14. And the way the Lord comes back and addresses the situation is he puts the bully in his place. It says, break thou the arm of the wicked and the evil man. Seek out his wickedness till thou find none. You know what God does? He drives out wickedness from the earth, starting with the source. All right? Now, keep your hand there and go to Revelation. Last book in your Bible, Revelation. You say, what are we doing? We are comparing Scripture with Scripture. And it's really a lot of fun when you do that because you get to see how it's all connected. All right? Revelation chapter number 19. Revelation chapter 19 and verse number 20. Revelation chapter 19. Now, let me ask you a question. Do you remember when Jesus says it's better to fear him? Fear not him which can destroy the body, but rather fear him which can destroy both soul and body in hell. Remember that? You ever thought about that? Isn't that a weird thing to say? It's a weird thing because when you die, you don't have a body. You have a soul, right? However, when the Lord comes back, there'll be a few people, there's a handful of people, and you're about to read about a couple of them, who are literally cast into the lake of fire with soul and body, from the earth right into the lake of fire. I'm not talking great white throne judgment where the souls are there. I'm talking at the end of the tribulation after Jesus Christ has that battle of Armageddon. Look at Revelation 19 and verse number 19. And I saw the beast and the kings of the earth and their armies gathered together to make war against him that sat on the horse and against his army. And the beast was taken, and with him the false prophet that wrought miracles. There's two people. Before him, that's before the Lord, with which he deceived them that had received the mark of the beast, and them that worshipped his image. These both were cast, what's the next word? Alive. You say, what is that? Soul and body together. Into a lake of fire burning with brimstone. So the Lord comes back, and he has a sword with him, and he destroys the armies, and he inflicts damage upon the Antichrist, and then when it's all said and done, he says, okay, boys, grab them, throw them in. And out they go, right into eternity, into the lake of fire, in a body, in a physical body. That's pretty wild stuff. You say, what is that? That's the Lord seeking out wickedness till there's none. Now think about this, guys. Think about this. The Antichrist is going to show up. He's going to come in peaceably, and he's going to obtain the kingdom. Then he's going to turn to violence at the end, and everyone's going to see who he really is. The Lord, what does he do? He shows up with violence. Matthew chapter 11, the kingdom of heaven suffereth violence, and the violent take it by force. It's a physical kingdom, and the only way to have a physical kingdom and have peace is for someone to be a dictator. That's the truth. The only difference is Jesus Christ is a righteous dictator. He's a benevolent dictator. All right, he's not selfish. He's not driven by greed. He's driven by righteousness and by holiness. We've never had that. Fidel Castro passes away, and there's half of the people in political leadership today talking about, we're praying for, the peace of Cuba, and we know what he meant to his nation. And I mean, most of the people, the Cubans here in America, are going, what is wrong with you? This guy was a brutal dictator. He massacred millions of his own people, put them in prison camps. You always tell a lot by a political leader by what he says about a guy like that. And I'll tell you what, I don't care what anyone says politically, it may not be politically correct, but when our president gets up and talks the way he does, and I listen, please understand me, I am not advocating or promoting President-elect Trump. But I will say this, I appreciate somebody at least saying, that guy was a scumbag. Because he was. And what this earth has never seen is this earth has never seen a righteous dictator. When you think dictator, you know what you think? You think brutality, Pol Pot, Kim Jong-il, Kim Jong-un, Mao Zedong, Vladimir Lenin, Stalin. These are the guys you think of. Fidel Castro, and rightfully Hitler, all right? All, by the way, left-leaning socialists. I'll just throw that out there. But that said, the truth of the matter is this world has never seen a dictator that's righteous. And when you say dictator, you think something evil. Jesus Christ is going to be a righteous dictator. Guys, here's the flip side to it, though. Think about this. All right? Now, you were in Revelation chapter 20, right? Look at Revelation, or you were in Revelation 19. Look over one chapter from there. I was thinking about this morning. I have interesting thoughts when I'm in the shower or when I'm cleaning out a horse stall. Bunch of poop. I have no idea why. But I do. I think about, I'm out there. I guess because there's nothing else to think about, anything Bible and all that. But in Revelation chapter number 20, look, if you would, at verse number 1. I saw an angel come down from heaven having the key of the bottomless pit. That's where Judas' spirit was, in waiting to become the Antichrist. And a great chain in his hand. And he laid hold on the dragon, that old serpent, which is the devil and Satan, and bound him 1,000 years. So you know what happens? Peace on earth for 1,000 years. But you know what hasn't happened in 1,000 years when Jesus Christ reigns? There's not one vote that's ever taken. They don't vote. There's no vote. So you know what eventually happens? People go, we like to have our own say. And right about that time, the devil's let out, and he goes, you guys have been under this dictator for 1,000 years. And you remember when you used to listen to music you wanted to listen to and watch the stuff you wanted to on TV? I mean, freedom of speech, right? And you could do this and do that. And here this dictator is saying, you can't watch this, and we're not going to broadcast this, and we're not going to have this. And who does he think he is? Don't you think you should revolt against that? That's what's going to happen. Look down at verse number 3. Verse 3, and cast him in the bottomless pit and shut him up and set a seal upon him that he should deceive the nations no more. till the 1,000 years shall be fulfilled. And after that, he must be loosed a little season. You say, why is he loosed? Look at verse 7. When the 1,000 years are expired, Satan shall be loosed out of his prison and shall go out to deceive the nations, which are in the four quarters of the earth, Gog and Magog. That's connected with Russia. To gather them together to battle, the number of whom is as the sand of the sea. And they went up on the breadth of the earth and compassed the camp of the saints about and the beloved city, Jerusalem. And God had to think so hard about it. He just goes, oh, really? What? Come on, guys. Are we doing this again? Fire comes down from heaven, wipes them out. All right, and devoured them. And at the end of it, there's the great white throne judgment, and then we usher into eternity. Why am I mentioning all this? I'm mentioning this because of the way the Lord does things. The Lord shows up with violence, then he brings peace. The Antichrist shows up with peace, then it ends violently. and it's just interesting to notice the difference. You say, why? Because one is a deceiver, and one is honest. Listen, you know what the greatest kind of government? You say, well, I like the government we have. As far as people is concerned, I will tell you, I love our form of government more than I would a kingship, just to be honest with you. I do. I like the ability to be able to vote and all that kind of stuff. But if you're talking about bringing a perfect man of the earth, he's the right dictator. He's the right dictator. All right? So go back to Psalm chapter 10. I say that because verse 16, Psalm chapter 10, verse 16, the Lord is king forever and ever. I like that. I remember one time I went to the Sanger Theater in Pensacola, Florida, and I watched Handel's Messiah. And I remember when they got to that part, and he shall reign forever. There's about 25 of us Bible college students. And some of us are starting to get up, yeah, And here's all these cultured, upper class, highfalutin people. They're looking around, they got their, champagne. What's going on with these guys? Oh, Bible thumpers or something. And I got excited. Every time I hear that song, I get excited. You say, why? Because it's not that we're not there yet. That's why. The Lord is king forever and ever. I like how the Bible puts things in a perspective that's eternal. David is writing, God, would you arise? Would you come back? Then it says, the Lord is king forever. You say, well, how is he writing that? He's writing that from the perspective as if it's already happened. And you have to understand, the way God looks at our lives is, and I'm not a Calvinist, I'm not saying, all these things are predetermined and all this kind of stuff. I think choices you make, there are consequences to them, et cetera, et cetera. However, God knows how it's all going to end because he's God. And the Lord looks at it from the end back. That's why he, as a father, is always going, hey, look, this is how you're going to end in eternity. Come on, you can do this, son. You can walk and not live according to the flesh. Look at how you're going to end. You're going to end in glory. You're going to end in the sinless body. Why don't you start practicing now? I mean, that's what he does, because he's looking at it from over here. We're over here in the here and now. We're like, it's just so hard. I can't, right? That's how we are. But he's seeing it from the end. And he writes it from the end going back, and that's what you see in verse 16. The Lord is king forever and ever. And then look what he says here. The heathen are perished out of his land. Now that's an interesting statement for a couple of reasons, all right? One of the reasons is, it sounds like what the Lord's going to do is he's going to clean and cleanse the land, all right? And that's what's going to happen during the millennial reign of Jesus Christ. You're going to have a cleansing of the land, all right? Look again at Psalm chapter 37. I told you we'd be there quite a bit. Go to Psalm 37. The other interesting thing there, not just the fact that the heathen are perished out of the land, but also, further than that, it says his land. His land. It's God's land. Guys, when they start arguing over what they call it, dual nation solution. What do they call it? Two-state. Thank you. I couldn't think of it. A two-state solution over in the Middle East. It's a bunch of garbage. All right. You say, why? Because I think about it this way. If I came to your house and I said, there was a time when my people wandered on this land. Now, we weren't a nation, but we passed through here, and I think I'd like to have your house because, after all, we passed through here before. How would you deal with that? I don't think you'd be like, yeah, I think we need to come up with a two-state solution in my home. I think you'd be like, no, I bought this house. You got historical information that shows that David, the king of Israel, bought the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite, and he bought that threshing floor for a certain amount of money, even though he was told he could have it for free. He said, no, I want to buy it. And boy, he was a smart guy for that. Because now you got history showing that a king bought a piece of land and said, this is where we're going to worship our God. And that place is where the Dome on the Rock sits today. And they argue about whose land it is. It's the Jews' land. It's God. You say, why? Because it was God's land to begin with, and he gave it to them. All right? But look at Psalm 37 and look at verse number 9. Psalm 37 and verse 9. For evildoers. You guys remember George Bush? Evildoers. For evildoers shall be cut off. You know? For evildoers shall be cut off. But those that wait upon the Lord, they shall inherit the earth. Underline that. That's interesting. All right? But notice it says evildoers are going to be cut off. Verse 10, yet a little while, and the wicked shall not be. There's the Antichrist. Yet thou shalt diligently consider his place, and it shall not be. But the meek shall inherit the earth. All right? You're going to notice that, again, there's a contrast between the meek inheriting the earth and the wicked, the evildoers, being cut off. You say, why is that? Think about it like this. Go to Matthew chapter 5. You guys remember this? You've probably heard this before, the Beatitudes. All right? And there's a lot of practical things you can get out of that passage. But Matthew chapter 5, really what it is, it's a great reminder. It's an example. Our Constitution, I believe, is one of the greatest things ever written outside of the Bible. I really believe that. It's a great piece of literature, great document as a nation. But this is going to be the Constitution to the kingdom of Jesus Christ on the earth. You say, what is it? The Beatitudes. All right, look at Matthew 5 and look at verse number 5. Blessed are the meek, for they shall what? Inherit the earth. Now there's a contrast. What's the contrast of those that are meek? Proud. And the proud man, the wicked man, the Antichrist, is cut off. And those that followed him, evildoers, shall be cut off. But they that are meek shall inherit the earth. All right? You read about that there in Psalm chapter 37. And what happens is you have the nation of Israel. Jerusalem is trodden down of the Gentiles. Look at Luke chapter number 21. Is trodden down of the Gentiles by the Antichrist. There's an army of occupation. You say, what kind of army is it? Well, during the time of Christ, it was an army of Roman occupation. What kind of army will it be during the time of the Antichrist? The same thing. It's going to be led by Rome. Luke chapter 21. Luke 21 and verse 24. And they shall fall by the edge of the sword and shall be led away captive into all nations. And Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. All right? There's the time of the heathen mentioned in Ezekiel chapter 30 verse 3. That's a parallel of that. You also read in Romans chapter 11, until the fullness of the Gentiles be come in. Those things are connected. All right? And you're going to have an army of occupation that trods down the land. All right? But then you have the Lord coming back and restoring that land to his people. What happens? The meek inherit the land. Those poor people who are being persecuted inherit the land. Who gives it to them? The Lord does. The Lord does. All right? But look at Job 37. Job 37. I think Brother St. John may have touched on this a couple weeks ago in a Sunday school class where he talked about why doctrine is important. I think he hit on this verse. Job 37 and verse 13. Or look at verse 12. Job 37 verse 12. And it is turned round about by his counsels, that they may do whatsoever he commandeth them upon the face of the world in the earth. The meek shall inherit the earth, right? He causeth it, talking about weather patterns. He causeth it to come, whether for correction, or for his land, or for mercy. You say, what's his land? The nation of Israel. And Brother St. John very well pointed out all the times that our government or any government has turned on the nation of Israel, has passed a law or some UN resolution against them, the weather that comes and destroys that land. Now, we're blessed in the sense that we have some things here. I'll put it to you this way. Some of the hurricanes that have come through and done the damage that they've done after some of the things that our nation's done against Israel, had those things happened 100 years ago, it would have caused hundreds of thousands of people to die. And the only thing that's, I guess you could say, God's mercy is that we've learned to build things a little bit better. But I'll tell you what, man, when you have the Antichrist leading the charge against Jerusalem, man, watch out. Watch out. The Lord's going to make it right. He's going to bring correction for his land. Why am I showing that to you? Because again, there's a promise that God gave to Israel. Go back to Genesis chapter number 28, that they would inherit land. All right, as a Christian, guys, let me say this. If you ever get land, hallelujah. All right, if things get really bad and you want to camp out in the Dominguez, Rancho Dominguez, you're more than welcome to, all right? But the truth of the matter is that we're not called as God's people at the day. God did not promise us a piece of dirt. God promised us glory up there, right? That's what we're looking for. Some spiritual inheritance. But the nation of Israel is a different story. Genesis 28, look at verse 4. And give thee the blessing of Abraham to thee and to thy seed with thee, thou mayest inherit the land wherein thou art a stranger. Notice that phrase, inherit the land. All right, look at Exodus chapter 23. You're going to see this over and over and over. Exodus chapter number 23. Exodus 23, look at verse number 30. By little and little I will drive them out from before thee until thou be increased and inherit the land. God talking to Israel as they're going into the promised land, as they're going into Canaan. Look at Deuteronomy chapter number 16. Deuteronomy chapter 16. You're going to see it again. And there's several more. We're just skimming the surface. Deuteronomy 16, look at verse 20. That which is altogether just shalt thou follow, that thou mayest live and inherit the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. All right, look at Psalm chapter 37. So it's clear, all right, that God intended for them to inherit the land, and you see this not just in history, but you also see it in prophecy, after which time they've been scattered. After which time the Gentiles have come in and trodden down their city and put a false idol in the place where God would literally come down and have fellowship with his people in the most holy place, all right, in the Ark of the Covenant, between that Ark of the Covenant where the cherubims come over, in that place that's called the mercy seat. They put up a false idol, and the whole entire world worships this idol. Now, you may think I'm crazy, all right, but I thought about this. I don't know, I've never used Snapchat, but I've seen pictures, and it's the weirdest thing. People like take these pictures of themselves, and they look like a lion, or they look like a cheetah or a gazelle. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Please don't make me feel like I'm crazy. Yes? Okay, this is real, right? That is Snapchat, is that right? Is that what that is? Okay. And you know, 100 years ago, if you told somebody that the whole world, atheists mocked the Bible. You say, why? They thought, well, who in the world, how can everybody in the world follow one man? How are they going to all see this image? Then the TV came along, and everybody goes, oh, the TV, CNN. Well, let's take it a step further. The internet came along. You got YouTube, you got everything instant. And now you've got the ability to take someone's face and make them look like an animal. And you get into some creepy, weird stuff in the book of Revelation about this stuff, all right? I'm not trying to go off too far on a tangent here, but the point is this. The Bible's right on. It's always right on. Look at Psalm 37, and when it has to do with the nation of Israel, it's definitely right on. Psalm 37, verse 29, the righteous shall inherit the land and dwell therein, until which time the United Nations resolution, no, forever. All right? Look at Psalm 37 and verse 34. Wait on the Lord and keep his way, and he shall exalt thee to inherit the land when the wicked are, look at it, cut off. Thou shalt see it. What are they going to see? They're going to see the turning of the Antichrist, his kingdom being destroyed, and the kingdom of Jesus Christ being established, and the righteous inheriting the land. All right, go back to Psalm chapter 10. There's more to it. There's other verses, but we're going to stop there. Psalm chapter number 10. Psalm 10. It's all connected. The Lord is king forever. Verse 16, the heathen are perished out of his land. Lord, thou hast heard the desire of the humble. Thou wilt prepare their heart. Thou wilt cause thine ear to hear, to judge the fatherless and the oppressed, that the man of the earth may no more oppress. And, boy, it seems like these days there's a lot of confusion about what it means to be oppressed. Everybody wants to be everybody wants to be a victim. Everyone wants to be the oppressed party. The Lord, you know how you know who the oppressed people are? Who God says it is. That's how you know who they are. All right, and God says his nation's going to be oppressed. By who? By the man of the earth. Now, Miss Jen had a great question a couple weeks ago, and the question, and it's very fitting for what we're talking about. The question had to do with the nation of Israel, And it had to do with this: how do you side with the nation if they're doing things that aren't right? If they do something that's maybe, as some might consider, a crime against humanity or something like that. Go back to Genesis chapter 12. Go back to Genesis 12. And there's a couple of things to consider in that question. The first question is, who's calling what a crime against humanity? It's interesting. I saw this picture. It's in the Netherlands. And you know what they're doing in the Netherlands because of all the problems they're having with the immigration issue? They are zoning parts of their city and separating them and building walls. And the Europeans are going, we have to do it. It's this or we don't survive. But yet when the nation of Israel does it, what do they say? They say it's apartheid. Right? Now who's behind that? How would it be okay for one? Let me put it to you this way, guys. If we had a fraction of the stuff that goes on in the nation of Israel going on in our country, I mean, we hear about a stabbing and you say, why is that such big news? Because it's an I'm not saying it's good, I'm not saying it's right, and we shouldn't deal with it. But in contrast to how frequent that happens in Israel, it's isolated. So who is behind saying what's a crime against humanity? I'll put it to you this way. The same media that says that they're committing crimes against humanity is the same media that says you are wrong as a parent for spanking your child. They call it abuse. And they don't make a distinction between real abuse and actual child rearing. And there is a real thing as abuse, I believe that. So you have to consider who's the source behind saying what is a crime against humanity. That's one thing. The other thing is this: there is no perfect nation on the earth. Not one. Not one. However, over there in Numbers, when Balaam or Balak, the king of Zippor, asked Balaam to come and to prophesy and to curse the nation of Israel. Do you guys remember that? Numbers 24, I think it is. Remember what happens when Balaam goes up into the high place? And he goes, I can't curse these people, and so on and so forth. And Balak goes, well, why don't you come over from this angle? There's a great message in that passage, by the way. And I want to preach it tonight because I need to preach another time. But he takes him up and he brings him to another angle. And he goes, well, I can't do it here. And okay, you come over here. And he looks over them and he says, you know what? These are God's people. I see no, what does he say? Not no fault. Oh, what does he say over there? Let's say go there. Basically, he says, I see no iniquity in them. In so many words, he looks over the nation and he goes, they're perfect. Now, they're not perfect. They're not sinless. And yet he looks at them, and brother, if you want to do some cross-examination, I'd greatly appreciate that. But he looks at them and he says, I don't find any iniquity in them. You say, what is that? He's looking at them as God's people. You say, what is that? That's the right approach. And even if they do something wrong, you know what my suggestion is? Let God deal with them. But as a nation, now think, yes, sir. Okay, now that's Balaam prophesying about a nation that just got naked and danced around a bunch of idols. That's what God says through Balaam about his people. So my point is this: if God said that after they committed all the atrocities that they committed against God, it's probably best in our place just to say, let's just leave them alone and pray that God continues to bless them. And we're going to side with them. You say, why? Because God did. All right, look at Genesis chapter number 12. Genesis chapter 12, and here's what you have with the law. The Old Testament law, the law of Moses, you have blessings and you have cursings, right? Deuteronomy, you're blessed if you do this, and if you don't follow the law, you'll be cursed in this, and you'll be cursed in this, and you'll be cursed in this. That's the law. What you're reading in Genesis 12 is before. This predates that law. And so in Genesis 12, I want you to see this and get a hold of it. In verse number 2, I will make of thee, that's Abram, I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee. There's no law, and there's no condition. And I will make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. Now look what he says. This is beside this trumps. All right, every time we use that, everyone goes, "That's the president." This trumps. All right, nothing to do with the president. This trumps the law in one sense. In the sense that what this has to do with is an unconditional promise, not connected with the law or how they adhere to it. All right? So what you have is this. God says to Abram, I'm going to give you this land. Now later on, when they're about to go in the land, God says, I'm going to give you this law. And if you keep this law, then you'll be blessed in the land. If you don't, I'll spew you out like I spewed the other nations out that were before you. However, I'm going to bring you back and I'm going to restore you. You say, why does he say that? He says that because of what happens in Genesis 12. And in Genesis 12, with no condition, he says, verse 3, I will bless him that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee. And in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. Here's the point. God deals with nations differently than he does individuals. All right? When we're talking about you dealing with another individual, that's vastly different than a nation's approach to another nation. All right? You say, how do you explain that? In Matthew 25, when Jesus Christ comes back to establish his kingdom on the earth, he separates the sheep from the goats based on one qualification. You know what that qualification is? How did they treat those Jews that were going through tribulation? That's the qualification in Matthew chapter 25. And it follows Matthew 24, where he explains what that great tribulation is going to be like. So again, the whole point is this. I can't stand here and tell you that everything that the government of Israel does is right. I don't think that, because I don't think there's any government on the face of the earth that does everything right. More times than not, there's plenty of blame to go around in the government, right? This is the way it is. That said, as a nation to a nation, we need to be behind them, even if the whole world turns on them, because that's exactly what's going to happen. And it may be that our own government, I'll be honest with you guys, I think the last 8 years has been the most sketchy 8 years in my lifetime as far as how we've dealt with the nation of Israel. When you're openly saying that you're their friend, and yet you do deals that put them in a really bad spot. The number one sponsor of terrorism in the entire world is Iran. And you give them billions of dollars, and they're sitting in the backyard of Israel, and they have said they want to drive them into the sea, and they want to wipe them out. You think that's a good idea? You don't think God pays attention to that kind of thing? So what I'm getting at is this. As a nation, we need to be behind them. Because again, if you read Psalms, and we're going through it right now, we know how it ends. They end on top. And you know what people do in political situations? They hedge their bets. There were people that were betting and saying, you know what? Clinton's going to win. And so they picked this side. And there were other people that said, no, we believe this guy's going to win. Trump's going to win. So you know what they did? And now the people that bet on this guy, they're going, I bet right, didn't I? Now, the thing here is it changes every 4 years. Now, in eternity with Jesus Christ, this is going to last a long time. And you know he's going to be the king over the nation of Israel. He's going to stand for them. So, if you know how it ends, good idea to be on their side now. All right, Psalm 10, we'll close here tonight in verse 18. To judge the fatherless and the oppressed, that the man of the earth may no more oppress. We might come back to verse 17, 18 after all next week, but let me just say this. There's coming a day when the tempter will be banished, we'll lay our burdens down. You like that song? It will be worth it all. Why? Because he'll be no more able to oppress. And I look forward to that day. Any questions on what we looked at tonight?